Hello and welcome to the Avrum Rosensweig Show. My name is indeed Avrum Rosensweig, and I am delighted to be here today. And I'm going to tell you why. But before I do that, let me just start with a little precursor, and that really is to express to my viewers and to my listeners why it is that I do this type of podcast, why I interview people who are highly inspirational and incredibly accomplished in life. I do this because I want to remind individuals about the beauty of our existence, about our world, about our life, and the potential that we have to accomplish a lot in a very, very short time that we are here on this planet. I ask you, please, to listen to my guest today and to take out of their narrative what works for you in terms of your life. Many people are looking for that journey, that trek that they can go on, whereby they can say, you know what, I have found meaning and I have found purpose in my life. Because we know this from great writers and great people who have talked about the our life is that when you find that thing, when you get into the zone, you discover that thing in your life that works for you, happiness comes with it, right? A sense of purpose, a sense of meaning. So this is an important interview, not only because we want to get to the really depth of something very important in our lives, but really to give you the opportunity to help push yourself forward. So here we go. This episode, we're joined by three very incredible people, profound individuals. And don't look around, Steve, who are great, great lovers of the art of film.
You
And
could
that
just stop
includes
at great lovers.
great lovers as well. And that includes Julian Schlossberg, Steve Stoliar, and Paul Saltzman. Their passion for a movie goes beyond just watching it. It's a deep connection to the stories, the craftsmanship, and the magic that happens on the screen itself. From their behind the scenes experience to their personal reflections on iconic films, they'll take us on a journey through their love of film and their favorite moments in cinema. Whether it's the thrill of discovery or the timeless power of storytelling, these three film enthusiasts, professionals in the industry, have a wealth of knowledge and insight that will remind us all of the deep emotional bond that movies can create. Let's start with my friend Julian Schlossberg. Julian, firstly, welcome, Julian, and thank you for doing
Well,
this.
thank you, Avram. Happy to be here.
Thank you. Thank you. He's a renowned stage and screen producer, distributor, author, radio and television host, record executive with a career that spans decades in the entertainment industry. He has worked on some of Hollywood's most iconic films and is known for his deep knowledge of cinema history. Julian's passion for movies and his wealth of experience make an invaluable voice in the world of film. Now, Try Not to Hold It Against Me is his memoir. He has interviewed over 120 of the most influential figures of the 20th century for his series Witness to the 20th Century. Schlossberg has partied with Barbara Streisand, Liza Minnelli. He's experienced the paranormal with Shirley MacLaine and Betty Hill. He's produced for Bruce Springsteen, Elia Kazan, Woody Allen, Sid Caesar, and Orson Welles, and the list goes on and on and on. I'd like to introduce to you my dear friend Steve Stolair. Steve, thank you for doing this.
My pleasure so far.
So far, so good. Yeah, exactly. Steve has been a professional writer for decades, providing material for Dick Cavett, as well as penning episodes of such television series as Murder, She Wrote, Simon and Simon, the new WKRP in Cincinnati, and Sliders. He's produced documentaries on such stars as John Lennon, the Marx Brothers, Elvis Presley, Shemp Howard, and Dr. Martin Luther King. Additionally, he has provided voices for various animated specials, including Frosty Returns, The Oz Kids, and Snoopy's Reunion. He's born in St. Louis. He now makes his home in California, and in 1996, he first published his memoirs called Raised Eyebrows, My Years Inside Groucho's House. And more recently, he wrote and published a book called Salamis and Swastikas, Letters Home from a GI Jew, and that GI Jew happened to be his father. A wonderful book.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Paul Saltzman, welcome. How are you?
Thank you. I'm good.
Thank you for doing this.
My
Uh,
pleasure.
Paul is a Canadian film and television producer and director. He's two-time Emmy Award recipient. He's been credited on more than 300 films, both dramas and documentaries. Paul is best known for his impactful documentaries and storytelling. With a passion for capturing real-life stories, Paul has worked on various notable projects that highlight important social, cultural, and historical issues. His work is deeply influenced by his experience and dedication to uncovering meaningful narratives, often exploring themes of peace, spirituality, and human connection. His most famous work includes The Beatles in India, which chronicles his transformative journey with that legendary band. He was born in 1943, the son of Percy Saltzman, wonderful figure, Canada's first English-speaking TV weatherman, and his mom was Rose Cohen. After briefly studying mathematics and science, he did congressional civil rights lobbying in Washington, and in the summer of 1965, he did voter registration work in Mississippi as part of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, which would later lead him back to the area to explore the concept of prejudice and racism within his first documentary feature film, Prom Night in Mississippi. So may I say that you guys are hugely accomplished? Would that be appropriate?
I think it's more true to say that we're handsome.
You're good-looking boys, good-looking Jewish boys.
I still feel as if I never quite retracted my landing gear. I mean, people look at IMDb and they say, look at all the things you did. And it's like, yes. And the books and so on and so forth. And I'm not living on the street yet, so I'm doing something right. Yeah. And yet there is a nagging feeling that I never quite soared. And so SOARED, not SWO. And so people will say, wow, you've done so much. And I feel like, I don't know, now I'm 70. And so I'm much further to the end than the beginning. And I'm pleased with what I did, but it's hard for me to say, and I'm proud of what I did. I'm not ashamed of it, but I just don't feel that I've really soared. I don't know if the other gentlemen have felt that or if I'm alone in this.
So, Julian, do you feel that way?
Well, I think Steve makes a very interesting point, in as much as I don't think no matter what you've done, if you've been accomplished at all, you feel you have done everything that has to be done. Mm-hmm. There's still things to be done. There's always things to be done. And yes, I would say that soaring is a whole other story. But as far as what I wanted to do was to learn, I realized I wasn't going to get a degree as a doctor, a lawyer, or accountant, a CPA. So I wanted to learn every aspect of show business. I thought, if I'm going to go into this business, I know one thing: knowledge can be power. If you can get knowledge, you may be able to have some power. And so I not only learned every aspect I could of the show business, but try to be in all those fields at one time. And so, yes, I go along with Steve. Soaring has not been my middle name, but working, I guess the answer is it's only work if you don't want to do it.
Yeah, right. Now, Paul, you've hobnobbed with some of the greatest, let's say in music alone, the Beatles, and one would guess that you must have an enormous sense of accomplishment. Is that the case?
That's an incredibly complex question, much more so than appears. I've learned that nobody gets out of childhood without trauma. Nobody, not a single human. It begins when you're born and the lights are too bright and everyone's talking too loud and you're just this little thing arriving from some other, who knows where you were, or even if you were.
And they slap you on your ass.
They give you a shot in the ass.
Welcome to the world.
That's a very good point. So one of my great passions, and I believe one of my areas of pretty good knowledge, is the human psyche. We have 8 billion unique psyches, from the serial killer to Martin Luther King, from Gandhi to whatever. So it's important to me to evolve my being in a way that is about love and peace and creativity. And it's important to me to evolve my work in that same kind of way. And for whatever reason, I had an epiphany in my 20s when I first started making documentaries. And the epiphany was I heard an internal guidance voice. I will call it my soul, even though I was brought up as a atheist by sort of progressive parents. But I had this thought that was clear as day, and it still sits in my heart, and that is that I can make junk food for people's psyches, or I can make health food for people's psyches. And I have an obligation as a human not to make junk food, not to feed into your inner psyche shit that makes your life harder, that makes other lives harder. So when I think of how do I feel about my accomplishments, right now I'm in a period where I'm finding it very hard to raise money for my projects. And I love my projects. They happen to all be true stories that to me lift the spirit, lift the heart. I don't mean to go on, but I'll just say when I made my first real documentary, it was a half-hour film on a Jewish bakery in Toronto. And the reason I made it was you walk into this Jewish bakery, besides the best baking you've ever had, there was joy all the time. The family of 3 sons and daughter who had carried on from the mother and father. And it took me 2 years to convince the family to let me make the film. Oh, why would you want to make a film about us? We're just ordinary people. And they meant it. So I made the film. To my surprise, it won the top 3 awards at the Canadian Film Awards that year. Very strange, because it beat out all the dramas, which has never maybe happened before or since. A documentary made for $5,000 beating out the dramas for Best of Festival. I get interviewed for the first time. I'm getting to answer your question. It's complex, like
Good.
I said. Yes. I get interviewed for the first time, and the interviewer says, "Why do you make the films you make?" And I had never thought of that. And in that moment, my soul answered, my heart answered. It wasn't a thought, it just came from the body. I said, I make films about people who give me courage to pass that courage along to others. And that's what I've done all these years, and I still do. So how do I feel about my accomplishments? Right now, I'm feeling frustrated that I'm not being too successful in finding money to make the films. The scripts are ready. They've been developed. So about 6 months ago, and this is the end of the answer.
Yes.
About 6 months ago, I was feeling down one day, sitting here in my kitchen at my island, which is my desk. I note that you all have books behind you. I should probably add in digital books or something.
I can change it to the waves crashing at Carmel. Or
Might not be a bad idea. Yeah.
So I pulled up. I was feeling bad. I was feeling frustrated, and I wasn't feeling good about my life, trying to get work done, not getting work done. And I pulled up my 1-page bio. I have a 7-page bio. I have a 1-page bio when somebody asks. And I read my 1-page bio. And I swear to God, this is what happened. I said out loud without thinking, I said, that guy's pretty cool.
Right.
He's done a lot of good things. And I felt satisfied. And then I had this thought. It doesn't matter if I ever make another film. I'm okay. So back to childhood trauma, everyone grows up not feeling good enough. Now, maybe some people cover that up in ways with drugs and alcohol and ego and all the rest of that stuff. So, yeah, that's my complex answer.
And a very good answer at that. Thank you. Julian, I want to ask you in that light, what Paul just expressed. Is that your narrative, or somewhat has life as a film person been constant positive energy? Are there dips sometimes? Where are you at today?
Well, the thing that I dislike the most in what we all do is raising money. I don't hate it. I despise it. I find it the worst of anything that I've ever had to do in show business. Anything else I love, or almost everything else I love. But that is horrendous. So the fact that Paul is feeling that, I must say I felt it and have continued to feel it. throughout the 60 years I've been doing this. So, yeah, as far as my feeling about, I guess, the life, I think we're kind of born with a certain amount of either the glass half filled or half empty. I really do think that. I honestly don't think you can fight it. You can say I gotta feel better than I do, but by and large, it's what happened, and I feel blessed because I was born seeing the glass three-quarters filled. I was born that way. I've always felt that way. I have a very positive attitude. My mother, God bless her, would call me a Pollyanna, of course, because she was not that way at all. And I guess I I I think that's what got me by because God knows we all can say, all four of us, we've experienced the downtime, the down things where things are not going the way you want. And that's, I guess, what you have to do. But, we grew up with songs, all four of us. One of them was the song "Count Your Blessings," and it is something to do. When, as Paul just said, he looked at that one page and said, "Hey, I did okay. I did all right." And I think that's be a wonderful thing to be able to do. So yes, I feel very blessed that I had that glass three-quarters filled most of the
Yeah,
time.
good for you.
Not when I'm raising money.
No, when you're raising money. Yeah, nobody likes that at all. Steve, you and I have
Some
had a
Abram, let me just interrupt. Some people love it. I'm dying to find one of them, by the way.
right.
But there are
That's the point.
people who really love doing it. And I wish I partnered with them.
Listen, I'll keep my ears open, but I'll probably grab him first. Steve and I have done a couple of interviews together, and he has written a magnificent book. He's written a couple, but this one specifically, Raised Eyebrows, My Years Inside Groucho's House. And at 19 years old, he got a job with Groucho Marx. And what was the job? It was working in Groucho's house, together with him, helping out, being an assistant, and doing all the stuff that Groucho needed. And it was the last days of Groucho's life. I wonder what it was leading up to that, Steve, that would make you want to have such a job. You from my discussion with you once again, I remember how mesmerized you were with his films, with the Marx Brothers films, and you described them in such magnificent terms. What do you remember drew you to Groucho Marx, wanting to work for him, and also the industry itself?
Well, oh dear. Well, I had loved old movies since I was a kid. Now we have at least two generations of people who think old movies is before Star Wars.
Mhm.
But I I loved watching even like silent comedies and 30s films. And of course, I wasn't alive back then, standing in the snow to spend 15 cents and forget my depression woes. So it wasn't as if I was a contemporary of any of those things, but they really appealed to me. And not out of effort, but just out of love, I started to learn about the people in the old movies and the comedians. And there was something about the Marx Brothers that just leapt from the screen. And then of them, Groucho, I related to. Um, my mother, my mother's side of the family loved wordplay and puns and double entendres, that sort of thing. And that peppers much of my life now, much to people's frustration. Matter of fact, Julian, uh, some years back, a friend of mine was bemoaning all of the solicitations from charities he got in the mail. And he said, I got one today, excuse me, from the Center for the Partially Sighted. Why don't they just call themselves the Center for the Nearly Blind? And I said, because they prefer to think that their glasses are half full. I'm I was pleased with that I came up with that. So when you said the glass half full, three quarters full, naturally I think of my pun. And Hitchcock said puns are the highest form of literature. I don't know if that's true, but it's nice to know I'm in good company. But I never thought I would get to meet my hero because he was old and infirm. And, I don't know if I don't want to spend time retelling how our paths crossed, but it meant the world to me. And touching on some of what's been said before, I was always yearning for my dad's approval and pride, and forever getting disappointed. I would blow up the balloon and he would take out a pin. And as a matter of fact, for instance, there was a moment in my 3-year stint at Groucho's when S.J. Perelman was coming back from one of his round the world junkets. And he came by Groucho's, and I was there that night. And I came back to my dorm at UCLA, and I thought, I've got to tell someone who's, and I thought, finally, my dad. So I called my dad and I said, I have just had dinner with Groucho Marx and S.J. Perelman. And he said, are you neglecting your studies?
Yeah.
And so I dedicated the book after my dad died. I wrote the book and dedicated it to my dad, who worried that I was neglecting my studies. Because, in fact, of course, those were my life studies. It changed my life to work for Groucho and immerse myself in all these wonderful, colorful people from in front of and behind the cameras. And he could only see it as, well, you're taking these courses and you want to maintain this kind of grade point average. The first thing that I wrote that I ever sold was when my first cat Patches died at 17. And I wrote a short story about it and sent it into Cat Fancy magazine, the Cat Fancy magazine.
Yeah.
And they sent me a letter saying, we have read your story, Journey's End, and want to publish it, and we'll pay you $25 and 2 copies of the magazine. Well, it wasn't the money, it was the idea that strangers who didn't know me from anyone found. And at the time, I was looking to buy a car, and my dad called me the day I had gotten the acceptance slip from Cat Fancy. And I said, listen to this. Dear Mr. Stoliar, we have read your da-da-da-da-da. And Dad said, well, it's a start. Anyway, there's a fellow selling a Camaro. If you have a pen and paper, you can take down his phone number. And so, and even though he's gone, the tapes still play, and I still work to honor my own desires and wants and needs, and not think, is this what Dad would want for me? So the Groucho experience was just incalculably rich in many ways. I mean, the dark side was getting close to my hero as he was fading out. Instead of just being some fan kid out there in the audience or watching him in a movie on TV, I was watching him slowly go. And then dealing with the mercurial Aaron Fleming, who was the younger woman that came into his life towards the end, and in the classic fashion, alienated old-time friends and family. You hear that so often with the elderly, people who are vibrant in their youth, becoming infatuated with some young, ambitious woman who alienates everybody else. So it was a lot for me to deal with at 19. But then, as Dorothy said at the end of Oz, some of it, I remember some of it wasn't very nice, but most of it was beautiful. And so getting to meet Groucho and Zeppo and Gummo and Perelman and Burns and Hope and Maury Riskind, and it changed my life. I don't remember what the question was, but I hope that
I don't either. I don't either. It's fine. Paul, I just want to thank you for that. I just want to say, by the way, all of your answers so far, I feel as though you're letting me into your room and expressing to me some deep, intimate thoughts and feelings, which you do, I'm sure, to many, many people. But I feel so honored to be hearing these stories. So thank you so much, Paul. I wanted to ask you, in light of what Steve just said, your father was an icon across Canada. He was a weatherman for I think 30 years, and he was very, very well known. If I'm not mistaken, he was also a real activist within the Jewish community and the world. He was also a bit of an obstreperous man. I actually think I spoke to him before he passed away, but a real force. Did your father play a role in you pursuing a career in film?
Another very complex question. My father, who I now am at peace with, he died when he was in his early 90s. He refused to talk to me for the last 2 years of my life. Why did he do that? Because my daughter got a memoir published before he got his published. Therefore, he never wanted to speak to me or my daughter ever again. My father was a deeply flawed, deeply wounded man from his childhood, back to trauma of everybody in childhood. But I went to see him. I had an instinct to go see him. And I went to see him and I held his hand. I kissed his forehead. I said, "Hi, Dad, it's Paul." And he said, "I'm glad you've come." And he was in and out of consciousness, or he was in and out of this world, one foot in the next world. And I had read Aldous Huxley, and I was impressed by how Aldous Huxley helped his first wife through her death, and how Huxley's second wife helped him through his death by holding his hand and talking to them as they were needing to let go of this life, go on to whatever's next, if there is something next. So my father was a very mixed blessing. He was not a good father. He did some good things. He had me. I'm alive. I'm grateful for that. He kept a roof over our head. He was the breadwinner. He put food on the table. He was also a boxer in university, and he had a lot of suppressed rage. So in my early teens, he punched me in the face or the head 3 or 4 times with a boxer's power. Now, thank God, I never got cut. I never had a bone broken. I cried, obviously. But near the end of his life, we would go out once every 2 or 3 weeks. I'd invite him out to his favorite Jewish bakery. And I would invite him out because he never knew how to call and say, "I'd like to see you." And we would go out to this place every 2 or 3 weeks. And he would say things like, "How come you're so lovely?" And I would say, "Oh, thank you, Dad. Well, I'm just me." And one day he took my hands in his hands across this table in this bakery. And I put my hands in his hands. He put out his hand. And he looked me in the eye and he said, "You're the best Saltzman that's ever been."
Wow.
And what happened was magical. Brings tears to my eyes now. It was magical because in the instant he said that, I felt my heart start to close to protect myself, because he had been abusive many times in my life. I would invite him to come see my films when they were first shown. He would not show up. So there was a very mixed dance here. Someone very knowledgeable about me and my father once said to me, "I think your dad was jealous of you." I had never thought of that. Maybe, who knows? But what happened is, in the instant that my heart started to close, I heard my soul talk to me, and I have a direct relationship with my own soul. I talk to my soul, it talks to me. Anytime I want to, it's always available, like that wise inner elder. And in the moment my heart started to close, this was all instantaneous, Avram. I can't believe it happened so fast. He said this, it was beautiful. My heart started to close, and I heard my soul. And my soul said, "In this moment, he really means it. Just let it in." And I relaxed my heart and I took it in. And it was a beautiful moment between us. Now, a year or two later, he wrote me a letter saying, I never want to see you or your daughter again because she had had her book published before he could have his book published. By the way, in the moment he did that, he sunk his chance of ever having his book published because I was the one who was going to take it into the world. And I said, I'm done. I'm done. I've spent enough time in my life trying to please my dad, trying to have a relationship with him. But in terms of film, I can thank him for a bunch of things. For example, because he was a television star and he was a weatherman, an interviewer, a host. He was the kind of Walter Cronkite of Canada for quite a long time. He had me come on his science show when I was 8 years old and hold little apparatus. So I knew what a TV studio was like. When I was in university and I needed to make some money, he told me about a radio show called Hobby Club, and they would pay people the $25, Steve, to go out and do an interview edited about a hobby. So he played his part in bringing me into the industry, or at least creating a Paul that had no fear of walking into a studio. So for that, I'm hugely grateful. And for him saying, and it wasn't about the best Saltzman that's ever been. That was his way of saying it. And, I'm heartened by those words. But he said a couple other things to me that helped change my life in ways that I am hugely grateful to him. I'll just say one of them now. He said, give flowers to the living. The dead can't appreciate them. Mm-hmm. He was never good at that, except the time he took my hand. But I took it to heart. And I do that all the time. I do that all the time. I read about somebody and I feel whatever I feel, and I reach out to them and I say, do you like the Beatles? And if they say yes, I say, I'd like to send you my book, just for the pleasure of celebrating you. I'm celebrating you. I've read that you do these great things. I just want to say bravo. So he gave me that huge gift of give flowers to the living. The dead can't appreciate.
Yeah, thank you for that, Julian. I want to ask you, you're an insightful fellow. Just really simply, when you hear Paul's narrative, what are you thinking about?
I was thinking about how oh, I'm sorry.
No, Julian, I want to hear from Julian.
I was thinking about how fortunate I was compared to the other two fellows and you, Avrum, that I had a father who adored me. And I mean, when you have that, and and a mother, I mean, my mother was real tough. She was the Bruce Lee of my life. She knew how to knock me for all over town. But the one thing I was fortunate enough to have was I was an only child and I was loved by both my parents. My mother's love was a little tougher than my father's. So I was thinking of that, and I was thinking very much about the soul, and that will get us to our first movie, Double Indemnity, because we know that Edward G. Robinson constantly talks about the little man inside. And that's what I think Paul is referring to, is the little man inside that does speak to us. And the power of intention is really important. And don't know if people really recognize it, but even Steve obviously somehow got to a man like Groucho Marx where nobody could do that. I mean, the power of intention, somehow he wanted to do it and he did it and he got it done. And Paul already has said about the bakery. Even the people in the bakery didn't want to have the film done, and he got it done. So I think the power of intention is really important. Now, I have my own Marx Brothers story, if I may.
Yes, please.
My father, I was 4 years old, took me to see A Night in Casablanca. Now, A Night in Casablanca, as Steve knows, was really the last film that the three Marx Brothers made together. There were a couple of other films afterwards where, a Groucho would make a cameo appearance in Love Happy or something like that. But by and large, that was the last movie. I end up having a distribution company and owning a lot of movies to sell all over the world. And believe it or not, I end up owning the first movie I ever saw. I owned A Night in Casablanca.
Wow, yay.
Yeah.
Now, as we all know, we all study acting. We know that we talk about the arc. Well, what an arc that was. To see that as your first movie and then own it, the negative, for the rest of your life. So it was an interesting story.
Do you find
Bravo.
do you find,
Bravo.
Julian, through your years in Hollywood and your years working on films, I just want you to guess on this more or less. Do you find people that you work with, actors, producers, directors, that their stories are more in sync with Paul Saltzman's or with yours? Happy people, not happy people?
I think that almost every actor I have become close with had a horrible childhood, really a bad one.
Hmm.
And if they didn't, if they had a reasonable one, the acting profession gets them damaged goods. They become damaged goods because the rejection is enormous. In they're called back 2 and 3, 4 times for a role, and then not gotten it, don't get it. So what I've always said, and I guess the reason that I'm crazy about actors and have so many close friends who are actors, is that I recognize that. And as we say in America in traffic court, guilty with an explanation. Guilty with an explanation. So that's how I feel. Yes, I have found that most of the people have, yeah, they want to be someone else besides themselves. That's what an actor does. They're going to play another role, not their own. I mean, it's a incredibly exciting profession, but filled with a lot of trauma. And as we know, 85 to 90% of actors are unemployed most of the time. That's a hell of a way to have to live. So
That's very rough.
it is, it is. And anyhow, I'm fascinated by both Paul and Steve's stories, so much so that I'm going to invite them to do podcasts with me later. So we'll talk about that, both of them.
Yay.
I had a friend of a friend was a lyricist who got a lot of positive feedback and always felt like he was fooling people and that he wasn't very good. And someone sent some of his lyrics to Oscar Hammerstein, who phoned this guy and said, I have read your lyrics and I think you have a lot of talent. And after the conversation, he hung up and said, wow, I even fooled Oscar Hammerstein.
Oh no. Oh no.
That's how deep that no, it can't be legit. Someone's going to tap me on the shoulder and say, we've made a terrible mistake. You don't belong.
No.
I
Insecurity.
want to I
Yes.
just want to say one quick thing here. I'm working on a book which is kind of a self-help book, but it's really just sharing tools that I've been gifted by others, conscious tools for living well. And I'm going to name the book, I think, Let It Be Easy. Right? But the reason I thought of that is that thing of thinking you're never good enough is such a common result of early childhood trauma. I mean, your father, boy, what a fucking nightmare, excuse the language. What a
Square away.
nightmare.
You can say nightmare. I don't mind.
Yeah. That is terrific. But yeah, all we can do is find the inner little man that you talk about, Julian. My inner soul is a feminine voice. Now, it's not a female nor a male. It's whatever the soul is in terms of pure energy. But to just hear that voice, which I first heard when I was 23, and that's why I went to India, and that's how I got a broken heart, and that's why I went to learn meditation, which is how I hung out with the Beatles. Like the trajectory of hearing the inner guidance. I've done a lot of great things. I've done a lot of wonderful things. I've had many knocks. But when people ask me, especially young people, because I like working with young people a great deal, they say, how do you have such a fascinating, enriched life? I say, just learn to hear your own heart. And then they say, how do you do that? And I tell them how you do that. But it's like if you follow your heart, it sounds whatever, but it's really very, very powerfully real.
There's that little voice inside me, Walter.
It's interesting, Paul, that you say "Let it be easy," and you're the Beatles. You got "Let it be" in the title.
I was thinking, here's some unasked for advice. Make the title "Let It Be" in giant letters and easy tiny, because you see this group, the Beatles.
I think that's a great idea.
Paul, I want to ask you a question, Paul. We're diverging here, but what the heck? This is a magnificent conversation. You're a dad. Do you love well? Are you a good father?
I think I'm a terrific father, though I know the errors I made when my daughter was young. But yeah, I'm a very present, attentive father. When she needs me, I'm always there, and I love her madly, dearly. She's a wonderful human being. There's a great couple of scenes. It's one scene, but cut into a couple places of me with my daughter on the Santa Monica Pier in the film Meeting the Beatles in India. And I just got an email today from somebody I don't know. I saw your film. I loved it. I love your scene with your daughter.
Yeah.
So it's like, here's all this rare footage of the Beatles, but what stayed with them was the clip of you and your daughter. That's what resonated with them. Interesting.
Julian, are you a dad, Julian?
No, I'm not. I decided very young age that I was not going to be a parent. Now, I love children, and I've had I teach all over the world. I really do care for kids, but I knew two things. One, I knew that if I had a child, I would change my life. My life was going to change. I was going to take care of that child, and I didn't want that responsibility against what I wanted to do with my life.
Yes.
I knew that I couldn't do both, or felt I was not capable of doing both. I wanted a career. I wanted to make it in the business, and I didn't want to have that terrible burden and responsibility of a child. So that was my decision. My mother once again said, "You'll rue the day you didn't have children. You'll rue the day." And so when I was in my 60s, I called her because she was in her 90s, and I said, "Well, I'm in my 60s now, and I don't rue the day." And her answer was, "Very funny, McGee." That was her answer. Those of us who remember Fibber McGee and Molly, okay, all right.
Right.
Julie, you said you taught around the world. Like where?
Well, I taught in Switzerland, in France, in China, in England. China was the most fascinating because I I couldn't believe that I was talking to thousands of people. I mean, the most I had ever spoken was 750 or 1,000, but this was thousands and a sea of black hair. Everybody has black hair. I'm sorry.
Did they understand what you were saying?
This is the fascinating part, Steve. I had a translator because they didn't understand. I'm going back to the 1980s or 90s, I guess 20, 30, 40 years ago. And I would tell a story, and then the translator would go, and I'm thinking of what's the next thing I'm going to say because I wasn't being interviewed, I was just talking. And in the middle of my thought, there's a huge laugh. And I remember, oh, yeah, a while ago, I said something pretty funny. I had forgotten it. So it was quite an interesting thing. I loved talking to countries that were not America. I mean, obviously, I spoke a lot in America and UCLA and many of the schools that I would be asked to speak at. But it was when when you're in France or you're in England and you're meeting people, young people who really care about movies, uh, sounds terrible to say, but they seem more devoted and more knowledgeable about the films that we all care about, as opposed to, as someone recently said, anything before Star Wars is ancient history. Well,
Right.
they don't feel that way. They know who Billy Wilder is. They know who Frank Capra is. They know who Alfred Hitchcock is. And it's very sad for me to see the lack of knowledge of history that has seems to permeate certainly American society and probably all over the world, but much more in my country here, where somehow uh, history doesn't seem to be matter. And of course, as we all know, the only way you learn is through history. Well, maybe not the only way, but certainly a very important way. So yes, I enjoy lecturing a lot and talking, but I always prefer to be interviewed because it gives you an opportunity to kind of think about the question rather than just keep babbling away as I'm doing right now.
You're doing a
Okay.
fine job. Fine job. Steve, when I was a kid, I was 5 years old and maybe four. My parents used to go to drive-in movies. And I distinctly remember the very first drive-in movie that they took me to was In the Heat of the Night.
Ooh.
Yeah, magnificent movie. And for some reason, I had some sort of clarity about the movie. Obviously, not the depth of the meaning behind it, but there was something about it that stayed with me, and it really kind of set the tone for my love for movies thereafter. Do you remember your first movie or one of your first movies?
I remember the first drive-in they took me to was Ben-Hur,
Huh,
not the Raymond Navarro version.
right.
Um, and I remember, I was only about five, and I remember kind of being traumatized when Stephen Boyd gets all cut up in the spokes of the chariot wheel. By the way, I'm sure I don't need to tell you, but Roman chariots that raced did not have those knives. The Scythian war chariots had those, but not the Roman
Thank you.
chariot. You want
Thank
to
you.
know that for next time. And he was all cut up, and that really made an impression on me. But the funny thing about the drive-in was years later, when I was about 11, I guess, my parents were thinking of going to a drive-in again. And we got in the car and I said, wait a minute, what about the pillow and the blanket? They said, what? I said, don't you need? And they said, Stevie, you were five when you went to the drive-in with us, and you would always fall asleep because you were just a little. And I just thought that was part of the gear of going to see a drive-in. The first movie I remember that really made an impression on me was Tom Thumb with Russ Tamblyn, and I just loved it. And the next day, my mom said, "What do you want to do today?" And I said, "I want to see Tom Thumb again." And every day for like 4 days, she asked me, and bless her heart, she took me to see Tom Thumb 4 days in a row.
Wow.
I had a I also had a childhood trauma experience with going to the movies, and that was I had seen Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein on TV, which is that rare film that succeeds as a horror film and as a comedy. But when I was a little kid, it really scared me, especially the Wolfman. So the Shaggy Dog came out, the Disney film, and my mom took me to see it. And every time Tommy Kirk was looking in the mirror and his face started to grow hair, I freaked out because I was traumatized by Cheney Jr. I don't want to live forever. Every night when the moon is full, I turn. And and finally she had to take me out of the theater because I was hysterical. And it was only recently that a cinephile friend of mine said, "You realize Charles Barton directed Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein and The Shaggy Dog?" I said, "Bob, I'd never realized that." But you think about people try to protect kids. I don't. This is before there were ratings, of course. And you think about, I know people that's like, I don't want my kid to see Wizard of Oz or he'll be traumatized. And it's like, but it's a fabulous film and it's part of growing up. But some of those films pack a punch when you're really young and impressionable. So things like Stephen Boyd getting chewed up or Tommy Kirk turning into a sheepdog can scar you for life.
I had to be taken out of the theater because I was so hysterical as a little boy to see Bambi when Bambi's mother gets shot.
Yes.
Kill Bambi's mother? What? I mean, I don't even know what Disney was thinking, but that was really traumatic. And the only other one was Samson and Delilah when they made Samson blind, and that just killed me too. Uh, so twice my parents had to leave the theater because I was inconsolable.
Yeah, harrowing moments, harrowing moments. Paul,
Yeah.
I want to ask you, you move much more towards documentaries. Do you remember one of the first, if not the first documentaries that you saw that you were really moved by?
It's odd. So first of all, I'm moved by human real stories. I've made many, many, many more dramas. I've made about, I haven't counted, but I've made about 70 documentaries, but I've made about 240 dramas in the sense of TV series, episodic dramas, and so on. The projects that I most love right now are four narrative feature films that are true stories, but I need actors and I need money. And I totally agree, Julian, that the most painful part of filmmaking and the hardest for me is making money. And I've thought exactly what you've thought, Julian. Why haven't I found someone who loves raising money, who can be my soulmate in film?
Mhm.
So if I find one, I'll include you. And if you
Oh,
find one, you can include me.
Hey, don't
Um,
leave me out
okay.
because I'm, as with you two guys, uh, I co-wrote the screen adaptation of my book, which is essentially, it's not a biography of Groucho. It's Groucho in his twilight years and this impressionable kid, and then Aaron Fleming, this unbalanced, ambitious woman in between. So we have a script. We have Oren Moverman, the director and co-writer with me on the script. We have Jeffrey Rush champing at the bit, is going to be playing the old Groucho, and Sienna Miller as Aaron Fleming, and finding the funding for a small independent film is not for the squeamish. And Jeffrey Rush said the upside of all the delays is I'll need less makeup to play Groucho by then.
That's great.
So,
So
Paul,
so
people,
I want to,
I want Paul to pick up on what he was saying there.
I will absolutely include you, Steve. If I win a big lottery and I buy tickets, or if I find that billionaire who has so much money but has a social conscience and has a heart and would like to express part of that. Um, One of my early big lessons on the third documentary I made, I was sitting across the table in an Indian restaurant in Toronto, and I was wanting to make a film, an hour-long documentary on the Canadian ambassador called a high commissioner because it was a Commonwealth country to India. And I wanted to make a film about this man because he was the most conscious man I'd ever met. And I thought, oh, I want to make a film about that. Nobody would give me money in the Canadian broadcasting world. What? You want to make a film about a Canadian diplomat? Boring. Get lost, kid. That was the kind of response. But magically, I ended up across the table with a multimillionaire who knew me and who knew this man. And this multimillionaire was a yogi. He ate nuts and fruits. He meditated. He did yoga. We're talking 1972, before any of that was fashionable. And he made money easier than almost anybody you've ever met because he was a visionary. And he gave me a great gift. And this is to the whole point of Where's the billionaire that I can share with all of you? He said, Paul is just a tool, a hammer or a saw. And if you think it's anything more, you're lost. That was a gift of learning for me as a 27-year-old that he would say that. I don't remember, and this is weird, Avram, I don't remember watching early documentaries. I simply get engaged with people and then I want to tell their story or I want to tell something. And it's interesting because, and I don't say this with any ego or arrogance or anything, I don't like watching documentaries much. I like walking into a movie theater. I like the room going dark. I like having some popcorn, usually with some M&Ms in the popcorn, which is not healthy at all, with butter, real butter. And I like being taken on a journey. And I like being taken on a journey out of my life into somewhere else. That's kind of partially the answer.
You know, what I'm taking out of your answer mostly is your intrigue with people. And I share that with you, and we all do, in fact. Just so happens that Julian and Steve are both dear friends of Woody Allen, who's an incredible, incredible director and has done wonderful things for cinema. Julian, how much of, let's say, your relationship with Woody Allen and other very high-profile actors and actresses impacted upon your love, your love for films themselves? When you get to know these folks, you know, they say sometimes you don't want to get too close to the people you're intrigued with or intrigued by. But I think in both of your cases, you both are very, very fond of Woody Allen. Um, would you say that he had an impact on your love for films?
No, I would not. I would say that I think he is the eminent film artist of the 20th century. Number one. I put him ahead of anyone because he writes and directs.
Mhm.
And he also makes movies that have something to do with the society we live in. But I grew up with Sid Caesar, watching Sid Caesar, Mike Nichols, Elaine May, Neil Simon, and Larry Goldbart, and I ended up being their producers. That to me is extraordinary.
Yes.
And Woody, I produced almost every one of Woody's plays. So yes, that part mattered to me. Comedy mattered to me. And I was lucky enough to this day, still represent Mike Nichols and Elaine May on their films and on their recordings and CDs. So it's an interesting thing to think about, which is the fact that I said earlier about the power of intention. I just knew I wanted to be in the business. I didn't know what part of the business, but I knew I just had to be in this business. And it was from the movies and early television because I was around for radio and then the beginning of television. Radio was unbelievable because what could fuel your imagination more than radio?
Mhm.
You're out on the range with the Lone Ranger. You're walking down those stairs to Jack Benny's vault. I mean, and you're picturing this. Your imagination is running wild. I feel sorry for the generations now because they're spoon-fed too much, and imagination is not necessarily being used the way it should be. And so again, I think those were gifts that I was given, radio, early television. So, you know, it's what it is, I guess, Avram, Steve, and Paul. I mean, we've all been blessed, I think, with having been exposed to things that younger people will never see.
Yeah, Steve, is that your experience as well?
Which part? Yeah, the Woody Allen part, he was a hero of mine. Um, my mom died in 1969 when I was 15, and Take the Money and Run came out the same year. And I don't remember having laughed that hard.
Mhm.
And it went a long way toward letting me see a little bit through the smoke and clouds of the grief. And it was always an occasion when the new Woody Allen movie would come out, because all of my friends were like-minded and we would go see the new Woody Allen movie. As with Groucho, I never thought our paths would cross. In a nutshell, what happened was um, Dick Cavett had sent Groucho a copy of his book Cavett, and Groucho shuffled into my room at the house and said, "Hey, read this, you'll enjoy it." And I thought, well, I better read it, or he's going. So I read it, and I really related to Cavett, but I thought he's this New York guy that went to Yale, and I'm this kid. And I sent Cavett a letter, and we started a correspondence, and now he's one of my longtime best friends. But when Groucho died, I figured, well, that's it. Then there's no reason for Cavett to stay in touch with me, because that pipeline into all the intrigue at Groucho's house is over. And the weekend that Groucho died, Cavett called me and he said, "Listen, I hope just because Groucho's gone, we're not going to lose touch. By the way, I hope you don't mind, but I've shown some of your letters to Woody, and he said they're very well written."
Mhm.
So I emptied the urine out of my shoes. And then when I went to New York in '82 to write for Cavett, he called me up and said, "Woody's shooting his movie around the corner. I thought if you came over, we could just happen upon it." And I said, "And he won't mind?" And he said, "Oh, I didn't say that. He may very well say, 'Really, Dickie, I wish you hadn't.'" And so I met Woody Allen, and then when I moved back to LA, we started a correspondence, and I've got a lot of Woody Allen letters going back to the mid '80s, and it it is, like I said before, it's hard for me to say yes, he's a friend of mine, because people so often will, they'll shake hands with someone and say, "Oh yes, my good friend Duke Ellington."
Yes.
But he really loved raised eyebrows, and he gets a big kick out of my impressions. He's fascinated with, the character actors. So the fact that I can do Grady Sutton or Burgess Meredith or something like that. "Well, Lenny, we'll have a little farm and we'll grow chickens." Anyway, the fact that he admires me is really hard for me to accept. Talk about that I fooled Oscar Hammerstein thing. So my friendship with Woody is something I cherish, and the grace with which he has accepted the onslaught of the scandal thing, which he's innocent of, but it's sort of out of fashion to side with an accused child molester, because of the whole Me Too thing and all that. It's like, no, you must, oh, sure, you guys stick together. You're a guy, you don't know what it's like. And it's like, no, it shouldn't just be incidental that he didn't do it. So
And
that's
in the whole history of child molestation, there's never been a child molester that I have ever heard of that only did it once with
right.
one person.
Oh, listen, my late wife had been horribly sexually abused growing up, so I knew all about that and the ramifications in adulthood. And even she knew it was Mia, a woman scorned, that pulled that stunt during the custody hearing, which is such a good, and then the whole Me Too thing. Anyway, we could do a whole show about that. But he seems to take it more in stride than I do, because I get hopping mad, and I tell people I type myself hoarse trying to explain all the. Did you know that Mia's brother is a child molester, is in prison? Did you know that he never spent the night at their house? It was like people that say, "Oh, he married his daughter, he married his stepdaughter." And and Woody, it's like one of his letters, he said, "Let me know if there's anything I can do to help. Just what you need, an accused child molester in your corner." Or he'll say it amuses me because I am now a pariah, that I've come to be known as a foreign film director because those are the people that are financing my movies now.
I think
So
you made a good point in one of our interviews too, Steve, that the fact of the matter is, I believe that he adopted two children, and these organizations will not allow such an individual to
if there
adopt.
was a hint that they would have been at,
Yeah, yeah.
how in the world could Woody and Sun-Yi have adopted two little girls? I mean, it would have been malpractice to have given the okay on that. But
And if I can just add, in a tough New York State, New York State is really tough on those things.
really,
So,
Paul, I'm not sure if this was by choice or by thought, it was unconscious or conscious, the fact that I brought on three guests today who their names all begin with S, but that's not the point, is that you're all Jewish. And I am very Jewish. My father was an Orthodox rabbi. So I grew up with a lot of storytelling in my life. As we conclude this wonderful panel discussion today, I'm wondering, does your Jewishness play a role in your accomplishments in film?
Huh. Um, I don't know. The reason I say I don't know, because I was brought up in a left-wing atheist family. I was taught there's no God, there's no soul, there's no spirit. But what I was taught, which was brilliant of my parents, was I was taught the golden rule: do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. That was the moral directive from my parents. That was it. They also said, be proud you are Jewish, period. I wasn't brought up in the Jewish community. The first time I was in a synagogue was when I was at a cousin's wedding and I was 15 years old.
Mhm.
My brother and I were both offered a bar mitzvah. My parents said, you're turning 13. Would you like a bar mitzvah or would you just like a party? Well, we'd never been in a synagogue. Why would you choose a bar mitzvah? When you're 13 years old, you choose a party. So, but my mother was, and my family was victim of a pogrom in southwest Ukraine. My grandfather was shot to death in front of his family during a pogrom. Um, my family, my mom was 8 years old, her sister was six, her brothers were 10 and 12. All the Jews of this shtetl were lined up in front of a firing squad of the attackers, and they were seconds away from being executed when the Bolsheviks arrived from the next town to save them. So my my upbringing included a awareness of that trauma. It included an awareness of the harm people do to people. And whatever it is in my soul, and if there are lifetimes, I don't know. I think there are, but I don't know. I don't think my Jewishness plays a part, except that my Jewishness means that I had a pogrom in my history. And that, I think, sensitized me to suffering of others and to my own suffering and to the psyche of others. How do the perpetrators do it? Who in my case, by the way, in the case of my family, the Bolsheviks caught the attackers. And in the historical records, true or not true, three of the attackers who were killing the Jews were Jews. Now, I'd never heard of that before. But, people are people. It's like I was shocked, and I was an ex-civil rights worker. I still do work in that arena with my films. I was shocked to learn a few years ago that about 7,000 to 8,000 Confederate soldiers in the Civil War were Jews fighting to support slavery, in my understanding. So, I learned that Jews are human beings. They can be awful or wonderful. Women are human beings. They can be awful or wonderful. People who make films can be, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think maybe the history of trauma in the Jewish pogrom department was part of my growing up to care about how people treat each other, and that becomes part of my filmmaking.
Julian, is there anything Jewish about your film career?
Well, it turns out that all these bromides that we all grow up with, especially in show business, starts out with, oh, the Italians are the singers and the Jews are the comedians.
Yes.
Well, it turns out that that's pretty well true. I mean, not 100% true, but it is. And so I guess if I look at my credits, and I've done 60 or 70 projects that I produced, almost all that are comic are with Jewish people. So it's not that you have to be a Jew to do comedy, but it couldn't hurt, as they say.
Would you,
So I think that way, to answer that question, Avram, yeah, I mean, it seems that sadly birds of a feather, flock together. Seems that's exactly what happened. And uh, but as a theme, I've always been very proud of my Jewish heritage, but not really involved in the religious aspect. Because if I wanted to pray, I would pray in English, not in Hebrew. And if I wanted to pray, I didn't have to go to a building. I would do it in my home. So I just feel great about the Jewish aspect. I'm not in any way uh, as we both know, as Paul just pointed out, I mean, sometimes Jews can do terrible things as well as any other group. But by and large, a group of people lasting thousands and thousands of years until it took till 1948 to have a homeland. And yet, this Jewish people survived. The Assyrians didn't, the Babylonians didn't, and many, many other groups didn't, but the Jews did. And so, for that, I'm quite proud of that cultural aspect of the Jews, period.
Steve, the book that I referenced before that you wrote, Salamis and Swastikas, which by the way is a wonderful title. I have a writers club that I've started up, and we talked about how one arrives at a title. The entire title is Letters from Home from a GI Jew, and I've read the book, and your father was vociferously angry about seeing how Jews were treated in Europe. He was furious with it, and he wanted, I think, in his words, was to go out and kill as many of those Nazis as possible. But
It's very strange to read a letter from your father to your mother saying, I wish if I had a gun, I would just shoot them as I see them being brought in trucks, right after the surrender in 45. It's all I can do to keep from shooting them. And it's like, this passion in him. There was the passion for my mom, which was new to me because the three Stoliar kids only knew them as middle aged and we didn't get to see the passion. But you feel this yearning. As a matter of fact, Woody Allen, who gave me a dust jacket blurb, said, I could not have gone through what the writer of these letters went through because I think being separated from my wife and young child would be just as bad as fighting real Nazis. And and his hatred, yes, I mean his hatred of the Nazis started at 10 before the book and just goes off the charts as he learns of all the atrocities and just the horrible things going on. And he just wanted to kill every last one of them personally and permanently.
is there something Jewish about your writing?
Not that I'm aware of. Uh, I grew up in a fairly secular household. I have very fond memories of Christmas when I was a little boy, but it was the Christmas of Santa and Rudolph, not Jesus and Mary. And then we shifted over to Hanukkah when my sister ruined my life by telling me that there was no Santa Claus. Um,
Damn her.
yeah, we did the Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah. I went to Saturday school, had a similar situation as Paul, because my mom said to me, do you want to go to Hebrew school? And I said, what happens? And she said, you go for 2 years and then there's a big party and you get presents. And I thought, well, I'm going to Saturday school. That's enough of the Jewish history thing. And I get parties and presents on my birthday. So I said no. So that's, she didn't push against that. I too admire the culture, the premium put on knowledge and books and humor. Although some of my humor heroes were Goyim, they weren't all of the Hebraic. For instance, James Thurber, Robert Benchley, two of my heroes were not remotely Jewish. So I suppose if someone wants to dissect anything I've written and say, well, that's there's a Jewish, I mean, Perelman kind of set the tone for a lot of Woody's pieces and it was an influence on me, but I don't think any more than Benchley and Thurber. So I don't know that there's much Jewishness to what I write.
I want to thank all three of you for doing this.
And you should.
Yes, I should, exactly, and therefore I am. And I'm a purveyor of life. I like to watch people very much. I'm assuming the three of you do as well. That's part of storytelling. And I watched each of you while the other would answer the question. And I thought, you've been through this so many times in terms of being interviewed because you're all so successful, but yet you were intrigued by what the other had to say, right? And
For sure.
It's a new set of stories. It's a new set of points of view or opinions. By the way, you're looking for that billionaire with compassion and a heart of gold. There's this guy, if you have a pen, Elon Musk, ELON. He's fabulously wealthy. You got nothing to lose anyway.
But you have a lot to lose, Steve. A lot to lose. So, Avrum, here's my request.
Yes, please.
For all four of us, let's do a show on movies next time.
Yeah. Okay. Good point. I just want you to know that I'm fascinated by human behavior. That's really.
And it's wonderful, and I think we all enjoyed the show. But I'd like to do some. I'd love us to all talk about movies on part 2 of this panel.
Yeah.
I think that's a great idea, and I'll leave you with one little tidbit. The movie that most impacted me emotionally in my life is The Shop on Main Street.
Oh.
So I'd like to talk about that one day.
All right. So if you're all amenable, I will do a part 2 of this. That would be a lot of fun.
Julian, I have a question about Double Indemnity. Is that Raymond Chandler sitting outside the office?
Yeah. Here's what I can tell you about Double Indemnity. I don't know about Raymond Chandler, but one of my favorite scenes is when they open the door the wrong way. I don't know if you've noticed that, but Edward G. Robinson is coming to see Fred McMurray, and Barbara Stanwyck is there, and he opens the door. Not the way it opens the door, it's the wrong way. And I have to believe they probably said, we just can't shoot this again. We've got to keep moving. So that's my favorite mistake of any movie, especially a movie that I love so much. I love Double Indemnity. I just think it's as good as it gets.
You don't notice the flaws when you're pulled into the story.
Not at all. And even if you did, I'd still be pulled in, except I'd like to see that door. I'd like to.
The Wizard.
Okay.
The Wizard of Oz was one of my favorite movies, and there's that moment when the Wicked Witch says, "I sent a little insect ahead to take the fight out of them," and I never questioned it the dozens of times I saw it. And then when I heard about the jitterbug sequence that was filmed and then edited out, it was a song. It's actually, you could still get the sheet music to it. It was issued because before they decided to cut it. It makes no sense for her to say, "I sent a little insect ahead," and yet who was ever bothered by that line?
Yeah, I don't remember that at all. Paul, what were you going to
So,
say? Paul, you were going to say something?
so I just looked it up, and it says Raymond Chandler, uncredited and previously unnoticed, has a tiny cameo in Double Identity.
There you go. There
There
you
you
go.
go.
Do you guys like hanging out with your type? Is it fun?
You
Is
mean
there
this podcast?
like if you were in a bar, let's say I got a table at a really nice bar, a nice restaurant, and we'll say, and it was all three of you together, and I would be listening. Would it be fascinating for you for hours to listen to each other's stories?
Sure, absolutely. But it would be also fascinating to be with any three other human beings and listen to their stories if
Right.
they were as
Right.
open to telling it and as alive and vibrant as telling it.
So that's the thing. You're all very, very vibrant about your lives, which is so beautiful to listen to.
Unless it's sports. If they're talking about sports,
Yeah.
I
Hockey.
become Buster Keaton, the Great Stone Face, because much to my father's eternal disappointment, I was never interested in playing or observing sports. The only thing I liked about football games was the halftime shows. Uh, so if it's a subject, or I have friends who are real techies and they'll start getting in, all the new features of the iPhone and the Apple Watch and all that, and my brain just glazes over. So I can't just say no matter what they talk about, if it's passionate, I'll find it interesting because there are certain
Fine.
subjects that are just in
When
my
when
mind.
when Paul and I start talking about hockey, we'll make sure to turn away from you because
And me, I'm with Steve.
and that's
I'm
fair
on
enough.
his team, so to speak. I'm on that team. Yeah.
Folks, what I would like you very much to consider through this panel discussion is the excitement and the great sense of life and the great sense of soul and spirit, words that were used throughout this interview, which you don't hear very much nowadays, that all three of my guests, all three of my panelists have. And I believe from my own experiences in life, when you dive right into whatever you're passionate about, then your spirit just starts to grow and it becomes colorful and it becomes beautiful and you can see the colors of life much more so than otherwise. And I feel deeply honored, even more so than I did at the top of this interview, to be with you three gentlemen who have worked hard, who have made some very good decisions in life. I'm going to guess not so good decisions too, and have accomplished some beautiful things for all of us, so that when we read your
hope,
book, what's
I
that?
hope I hope the viewers and listeners get half as much out of it as you've gotten and aren't saying what else is on.
Yes, I hope so too. Or I hope they're not saying is, geez, I thought this was a podcast about movies. So,
Movie.
Yeah.
Oh,
Well,
we
I look forward to part two.
yeah, so
yeah,
do I.
this is just the trailer, Avram.
Just the trailer. Yes, a very long
It's
trailer.
the
Yes,
director's
A
cut.
long
a
trailer.
long trailer.
Nothing to
Anyways,
do.
let's
Nothing
let's
to,
finish. Let's finish with Steve Stoliar taking us out of the show in the voice of Groucho Marx.
Well, I don't know if you want the voice of the elderly Groucho or the younger one, but I didn't really know the younger one personally. So I'll just say that I certainly was, you were crazy to invite me, and I was crazy to accept, and these other fellows seem like nice young men, but now it's time to play You Beat Your Wife.
Julian, do you have a blessing or a message that you can give out to listeners and viewers?
yes, listen again.
Good one.
That's my message. Listen again. We've got stories you wouldn't believe.
You wouldn't believe it.
You couldn't believe it.
Listen louder next time.
Yeah. Paul, any final words?
Let it be easy.
Nice. Excellent. All right, folks. Thank you so much for joining, for watching, for listening. We look forward to being with you again. Make sure to stay tuned for the part two of this wonderful panel. These great panelists. And until we meet again, like they say in Yiddish, sei gesund, go in good health, and make sure to make your life meaningful and purposeful. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.